Hello, welcome back, and today we're going to be talking about the ideological stronghold of woke. This is going to be a two-parter, so next week we're going to be going over post-woke, and we'll explain that at that time. But for now, we're going to pick up where we left off last time, where we were talking about the idea of a false consciousness. Woke is the largest false consciousness movement in the West, even in the name, as we are to be awakened or woke to the reality of what should be rather than the reality that is and that we fully experience. We used the Matrix analogy last time to illustrate what is happening here. To believe in a false consciousness is to believe in an unfalsifiable certainty of the construct of what someone believes, that it's the power that comes from the ability to say that those disagree with them are not awoken to the true reality, or in other words, the people that disagree with them are blue-pilled. Now it is time to introduce woke. And I think it would be best if we introduced it in relation to what we've talked about up until this point. Christianity believes that materialism doesn't work and it is not the path to happiness. Nihilism believes that materialism is just another false way of thinking that pacifies people. Woke believes that materialism works, and that's a problem. But at the same time, materialism wants to fill the God-shaped hole with either passions or possessions. Nihilism outright rejects the God-shaped hole. Yet woke, worst of all, puts the self in the God-shaped hole and creates a moral system that upholds that. That seems to be a very bold statement, but I believe it's the only reasonable conclusion to make. Over the next 2 weeks, we're going to be building a case towards that. Simply put, woke is critical consciousness. By critical, we mean it in the same way of critical theory or critique, and by consciousness, it means to be aware of how things actually are. What I'm going to do is to give an overview of the belief system that isn't meant to be totally comprehensive, but it's going to cover a lot of the main and most important aspects of it. In order to do that, though, I came up with a phrase that describes what woke does in both practice and theory. It mixes identitarian neo-Marxism and postmodernism. I understand that that might be a little bit unwieldy, but we're going to unpack it so that it's a lot more simple. First, we must look at the framework of what woke represents. It believes that everything is built off a system of power and dominant superstructures and that everything flows from that. The society we find ourselves in has social contracts, agreed upon customs, laws, and practices that we build a cohesive society upon. But because not all things are equal and that there are disparate outcomes, the conclusion reached is that these old contracts must be renegotiated and even outright eliminated to bring about a new and better humanity. But we cannot do so because there are systems of power and dominance and oppression that are in place. The people who are under the abuse of power here are trapped necessarily because of this dominance. And the only way to escape from this dominant oppressive reality is to be aware of this oppression and then to negate this oppressive force by denouncing it and by removing its power. Classically, the distinction would have been between the bourgeois and the proletariat under Marxism. It's taking the oppressive group and then the oppressed group, negating their distinctions, and then leading to a better future to which classist distinctions are erased because everyone would be on board. Today there are still group distinctions, but instead of a classist struggle between the working class and the elite class, there is now an identitarian struggle that takes on this Marxist frame. We have marginalized groups of people who claim victimhood against an oppressive force, which is the perceived status quo. With relativism, there are many ways to interpret this marginalization, and is not limited to either race or gender. While this is focused primarily on individual identity, there is a collective aspect where marginalization must be recognized in the individual groups. We have adopted this language of speaking in communities versus individuals, stating as a member of X community as if that qualifies anything we say as the truth. Therefore, any imposition against authenticity or what someone chooses to be will be regarded as holding up the oppressive point of view. This is no longer truly a relativist point of view. This is now weaponized relativism, where there is a clear moral system of values placed. It just happens to be the inversion of traditional values. Due to the change necessary to bring forth such a society, doing the work is necessary in order to be woke. One cannot believe in this framework of oppression and believe it is appropriate to do nothing about it. It must go from theory to practice in order for it to work properly. I'm going to spend much of the remaining time we have here today talking about why woke as an ideological stronghold both doesn't work and why it's so destructive. The viewpoint that all of humanity is built off of power and dominant superstructures, that is very telling. Because if that is what you believe, that is how you will behave. It means that there is a power and dominance superstructure that you are willing to use as the ends justify the means, because that's all there is. Those are the only two values that really matter. It is a might makes right mentality, and even while it's claiming to be benevolent, it will always devolve into nothing more than a power struggle, endless cycles of oppressed versus oppressors. We will talk about this more next week, but I believe that this is the most important criticism of critical theory. We cannot forget the temptation for power that ensnares the human heart with its desire, and this is all a framework that causes a moral impetus for us to abuse the power. This is the same tyrannical abuse of power that we see time and time again throughout history, going all the way back to Moses and Pharaoh. Social contract theory, taken to its logical conclusion, believes that we can get rid of all of the distinctions of the self in order to actualize who we are and who we want to become. There are two main issues here. First, that in order for that to work, there needs to be a denouncement of the real. All distinctions must be blown up in order for this to work. All traditional values must be questioned and removed as they are systematized oppressive structures. This means language needs to be changed. We don't know what truth is, for example, and we must critique any traditional wisdom or oppressive viewpoint. When these distinctions are already blown up, society suffers the cost. This is what it is. It means we are intentionally walking away from truth and righteousness. Second, one of the biggest slogans that you hear out of woke today is being the true authentic self. But that perception of the self is a self-created illusion. To denounce the real is to announce what could be, but not what actually is. This is not to maximize the possibilities of what happens in our own reality, but it is to be awoken to something truly imagined. This is the opposite of humility, the ultimate elevation of the self. It is to succumb to the desires and to override the societal norms in order to impose the change that you want to see in the world. To be frank, this means that the true authentic self is actually the opposite of what it says it is. To be your true authentic self is to be a false synthetic community member. To wrap up some of the criticism of woke values, we need to not just talk about its roots, but its fruits. While it attempts to destroy traditional Western values, it inserts its own permissive values. This means that anything can be virtuous, so long as it is in alignment with critical consciousness, meaning that there is a moral justification for evil. Because everything that is wrong is the fault of an overarching power structure, this means that there is an externalization of responsibility so that no one can be held accountable for their actions. The constant struggle between all of these identitarian groups causes social strife and anxiety within the West. Because of the permissiveness of wokeism and because the ends justify the means, I believe a lot of people are trapped into this belief system once they're in, because there's a lot of guilt that is associated with it. You don't simply walk away from a system where you're allowed to get away with anything and not take responsibility. It is also not healthy to believe a lot of these core tenet beliefs. If you believe that rejecting reality is healthy, that it's healthy to carry guilt, that it's healthy to believe that everything is made up of power and dominance, none of this is good for our young people to believe. And for that reason, I think it is very difficult for people, once they're in, to get out of this. Now, there are two stories in Genesis that capture some elements of what we find in woke. For this week, we're going to be talking about the Tower of Babel. The whole earth had the same language and vocabulary. As people migrated from the east, they found a valley in the land of Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, "Come, let's make oven-fried bricks." They used bricks for stone and asphalt for mortar. And they said, "Come, let's build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the sky. Let's make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered throughout the earth." Then the Lord came down to look over the city and the tower that the humans were building. The Lord said, "If they had begun to do this as one people, all having the same language, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let's go down there and confuse their language so that they will not understand one another's speech." So from there the Lord scattered them throughout the earth, and they stopped building the city. Therefore it is called Babylon, for the Lord confused the language of the whole earth, and from there the Lord scattered them throughout the earth. The Tower of Babel is representative of several things that we see today. First, it's about the hubris of man. It is not just a simple rejection of God to build the tower, but it is to replace God. By building a tower to the heavens, they reject God's rule and substitute their own, believing their own sovereignty to be self-sufficient. As they build the tower, brick by brick, it's a belief in their own progression that will earn them the way to heaven. Their works is what saves them, or brings about their utopia. Second, it's their virtue in unity and uniformity. They are united in a common goal, which sounds virtuous in a modern day context, but they are in unity in opposing God, and that is not virtuous, especially when they're trying to make a name for themselves. Being united in and of itself is not virtuous in a value system that is against the way of God. The last point of significance here is that Babel becomes Babylon, which enslaves the Israelites when it becomes the Babylonian Empire and is representative of the city of evil in Revelation. The full significance I plan on doing something in the future on, but for now, the most important thing here is that they are historically seeped in evil, and they will do what is evil collectively in order to get about what they want. Now, when this is all put together, they were attempting to replace God, as wicked as they were. While they rejected God, they put themselves in the God-shaped hole and decided that it was by their own hand that they were going to save themselves. In closing, if woke was a religion, it would be a graceless faith. There is no path for those who have wronged, or for those who wish to atone, even though they have upheld the system. If you try to make an offering or a sacrifice, it will never be sufficient. However, we understand that the grace that God gives us is freely given, and we must put our faith in Him, and when we sin or transgress against Him, we ask for forgiveness. We must be discerning and vigilant against this ideological stronghold. For the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation for all people, instructing us to deny godlessness and worldly lusts, to live in a sensible, righteous, and godly way in the present age, while we wait for the blessed hope, the appearing of the glory of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ. He gave Himself for us to redeem us from all lawlessness, and to cleanse for Himself a people for His own possession, eager to do good works. Proclaim these things, encourage and rebuke with all authority. Let no one disregard you. There's a lot more to go, but we're actually going to pause it right here and pick up next time. And until then, God bless. stay salty.